Hi, my name is Martin Koehring. I'm the head of Economist Impact's World Ocean Initiative, which imagines an ocean in robust health and with a vital economy. The World Ocean Summit is an integral part of the work we do on accelerating a sustainable ocean economy. You can find out more about the initiative's work, including coverage of key themes discussed during the summit, on our website ocean.economist.com. Welcome to this plenary panel on using data to drive investment. At the World Ocean Initiative, we regularly examine the important role of harnessing data for building a sustainable ocean economy, including ESG data or environmental, social, and governance data. So we devoted a whole chapter in our report on a sustainable ocean economy in 2030 to the blue data revolution. And of course, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development that started last year offers a great framework for kind of renewed emphasis on ocean data. So, from satellite imaging, to remote sensors, to big data and artificial intelligence, there are lots of opportunities for ocean data generation. And the opportunity is rising, and there's demand for new ocean data sets that is spurring this kind of growth of companies that recognize the value, both environmental and financial, of kind of being able to capture accurate and real-time information about what is really happening in the ocean. Data also have a powerful role to play in reducing investment risk, but also harnessing new business opportunities. So this panel will share examples of data collection and analysis, for evidence-based decision-making on investing across ocean-based industries and in the restoration of ocean health. So I'm joined today by three excellent, very experienced panelists. So first of all, we have Suzanne Johnson. She is Senior Advisor Ocean at the United Nations Global Compact and Head of Sustainability at Lloyd's Register Foundation. We have Dag Sletmo. He is Senior Vice President at DNB. And last but not least, we have Cavanaugh. He's Chief Investment Officer at School Science. You'll find the full biographies of our panelists on the screen under this media player. There are also a few additional resources there, including links to relevant articles on data-driven ocean investment and other blue economy opportunities from the World Ocean Initiative. I would like to structure today's discussion in four main parts. First of all, introducing the topic of data-driven ocean investment, and then looking at how to translate data into better financial and business decision-making. And then looking at the data sharing opportunities and data collaborations. And finally, looking at the 2030 goals. Where are the biggest opportunities for data-driven investment to meet our ambitious targets for this decade? So without further ado, let's start with an introduction to what is data-driven ocean investment. I'd like to start with Suzanne. Suzanne, you have wide-ranging experience in the energy and water sectors, and through your work at the UN Global Compact and also Lloyd's Register Foundation, you connect business and the sustainable development agenda. To set the scene for this panel discussion, why should investing in the blue economy be a priority for business?
Well, thanks so much. And hello to everybody. As we all know, the world is dependent on a healthy ocean, a healthy but also a productive and resilient ocean to help us address climate mitigation and adaptation, to food security, trade, and so many of our livelihoods. And, a healthy oceans drive our economies through power, transport, tourism, fisheries, aquaculture. And, we also are aware of the tragedy that's going on in the oceans with climate change, overfishing, pollution, unsustainable and unequal development. And these stressors are pushing our oceans to the brink. We're all aware of that. So financing and achieving a blue economy is essential to our world, to our lives. And so how we finance that is the fuel behind achieving a blue economy. And there are so many solutions in the ocean, and they need finance. But to date, spending on the oceans in SDG 14 has been completely inadequate. And, let's see, SDG 14 is the least funded of the SDGs. And if you look at the enormous gap in funding SDG 14, I think we need something like $175 billion a year. Of that, 25 is currently being spent. And of that amount currently being spent, only 8% it's estimated, is coming from the private sector. So, in order to actually achieve the opportunities that the ocean holds for us, we need to mobilize the private sector in financing the blue economy. And so often we talk about blue finance in terms of philanthropic and government investing, but actually, if you think about it, the private sector and corporate CFOs spend $7.5 trillion every year on their corporate funding campaigns. And so if CFOs, if you think about it, in the private sector are the new ESG levers, and let's start thinking about how we can mobilize and shift private sector funding towards a blue economy to achieve ocean solutions. I want to just say, though, that, and we can talk more about this, in order to grow these investments in a sustainable blue economy, the investments opportunities, they need to be structured correctly, of the right size, liquidity, and structure that investors can buy. So we can talk more about that, because data is the underpinning of structuring those and measuring properly.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Suzanne. I mean, you highlighted, both the opportunities but also challenges in terms of, the climate challenge, the food security challenge, the opportunities for trade that the blue economy and blue financing can offer, and the underfunded SDG 14. And you mentioned the need to mobilize the private sector and to harness data to make that happen. And Dag, I mean, you are obviously very much in this space. I mean, you are senior vice president in the seafood division of DNB, the world's largest seafood bank. In your experience, how data-driven are investments today, and how does ESG fit into that picture?
Yeah, I think, investments are very data-driven, and they should be. Investing with your heart is not a good starting point. I think we see in different sectors that, the, say, degree of data in investment decisions varies a little bit depending on availability, etc. But I think there's no doubt that is the direction will be more and more data-driven. I think, oceans are no exception to this. Maybe, there's some peculiarities to oceans. In some areas, you have the tragedy of the commons, meaning if I do what's best for me and you do what's best for you, it's bad for both of us. This especially applies to fishing and aquaculture, but also to some other segments. I think, parts of the oceans are not that explored. There are exceptions. I think salmon farming is one exception. We also, to a large extent, lack good regulations for new ocean industries, like how should fishing and aquaculture and offshore wind and shipping and seabed mining, all those industries live together. And then finally, there's ESG, which again, applies to all sectors, but maybe in some contexts is more challenging in ocean industries, since they are also often are newer and more emerging industries, and scrutiny is often much higher when you do new things.
Thanks a lot, Doug. I mean, you highlighted, the need for investments to be data-driven, but also the lack of regulation, the need to really apply ESG across different ocean sectors and the different opportunities. Grant, I'd also like to ask you, I mean, you have more than a decade of experience in designing risk transfer for climate-linked risk. And, could you explain for us the difference between kind of financing sustainable projects on land compared with the ocean? Are there tools available to kind of terrestrial projects that just aren't there for the ocean, and how can data close that gap?
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, it is true, coming from the world of terrestrial agriculture to these days Scoot Science works managing and forecasting the reams and reams of data that come off of salmon farms all around the world. And the contrast is really striking in terms of the tools that are available to terrestrial agricultural farmers than to the world of aquaculture and oceans more generally. So there's basic things that people take for granted, like forecasts that actually relate to the variables that are critical for your success, like like, the temperature at 5 meters depth. That doesn't exist today, short of the tools we're working to create. And so when you add that onto the financing tools that are not available, it's a pretty interesting picture. Now, with the financing tools in particular, the critical piece to going from not having a suite of financing tools in the world of agriculture to all of a sudden having a wide range of capacities in terms of how to manage your cash flows across time and space, it's really data and modeling that bridges that gap. And so please visit our website, scootscience.com. We've just released a big new paper called Green Sharp, Making Oceans Investable. And it's all about what you can do with an understanding of the core ocean risks in terms of bringing online new fonts of ESG and impact investing all across the world of salmon in particular.
Thanks a lot, Grant. I mean, you highlighted, the need for data and modeling. I mean, the financing tools need to be available. And we mentioned the need to understand ocean risks and to create tools and forecasts that make that happen. And then, we are already talking, about, how important it is to translate data into better decision making. I'd like to go back to Suzanne about this as well. I mean, it is a huge challenge, this kind of translating ocean data into better financial and business decision making. How can high quality data be generated that cover the entire kind of value chains and across different ocean sectors as well?
First of all, let me just say that one of the reasons why we want data in terms of investing is to measure impact. So if we have, standards and targets and frameworks that are principle based, and we know we're trying to go in the right direction, how do we underpin that, and how do we actually measure our impact in our ESG investments? And that is through data. And we have a lot of data out there. But there are many gaps, and you think about the democratization and the data gaps in terms of global north and global south. For example, times companies who are making investments in the global south are using proxy ocean data, and you think about business data for small, medium SMEs, for example, compared to large organizations, and so there are a lot of data gaps, and there's a data gap around safety and human interaction in the ocean, and so. In order to translate data into better decision making, we need to have more consistent and a better ability to harmonize data across across industries. And we have some insight to that, and we have kind of global databases. Think about Google Earth in mapping the ocean. But that's still, even that is not real time, and it doesn't necessarily have insight into businesses. So then we have other initiatives that, are looking at freeing up ocean industry data, and that will be useful. But we do have to consider the way we translate it, the way we harmonize it, the way we organize it, and how we pull this together in equitable ways, more democratization of data.
Thanks a lot, Suzanne. I mean, you highlighted the data gaps that still exist. You mentioned safety, human interactions. You mentioned the need for equity, the equity considerations, but also the consistency gaps. Harmonizing data across industries, having kind of more real-time data and data really that provides insights into business. Dag, I wanted to ask you as well. I mean, when you think about kind of translating data into better financial and business decision making, what do you see as the biggest barriers to ramping up sustainable blue investments, and what kind of data would be most useful in overcoming these barriers?
I think data that sort of correlates to what drives the value in the individual businesses, as well as data that kind of describes the general environment. You need you need both. And it needs to be, as mentioned, consistent. It needs to have the same definitions. And then I think also, getting the data as a starting point, then you need people to have the right mindset and the willingness and the competence to use the data. And that is also a learning curve for, different companies and organizations.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned the need for that kind of competence to analyze those data. And I mean, Grant, you obviously at Scoot Science, you focus a lot on analytics and forecasting in aquaculture. I mean, what is your experience in translating data into better financial and business decision making?
Yeah, so our core business is working with aquaculture operators around the world to take the data that they already have and turn it into better management and financing decisions. So, that we often come up against this saying that people have that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the ocean. Well, our experience is that's not quite true. Salmon operators in particular have been measuring tons of different core ocean variables for a very long time. The difficulty is taking that data, unifying it, enhancing it using oceanography and related fields, and then turning it into something that can translate to real human experience. So, we got to see that early on in that step of unifying the data. You're finally, for the first time, able to audit like nasty ocean risk events that have played out over the farms. And individual farms often have at least a little bit of chaos in the midst of one of those events, and chaos allows you to run natural experiments. What is the mortality when we do feed this cage of fish versus that cage of fish through a nasty ocean event like a high low dissolved oxygen event? And what we see is that your investment in data tools like the Sea State dashboard that Scoot Science runs pays for itself many times over with individual events. And you really do have tools today at a lot of aquaculture operations to minimize mortality, minimize your impact, and really make better management decisions across the board.
Amazing, thanks a lot, Brad. I mean, you highlighted, there's lots of tools and opportunities there to kind of audit ocean risk events, unifying the data, translating the data into real world experience, and that's really powerful. And one way of kind of to really harness these opportunities, of course, to generate that data, to share it, to collaborate on data. So I'd like to talk about that opportunity to work on kind of better data sharing and collaborations. I mean, Suzanne, at the UN Global Compact, you've published a roadmap for a climate smart ocean, and this roadmap identified industry, policy, science, collaboration on data collection, sharing, and management as one of the priorities. So how can the power of collaboration be harnessed for better data-driven kind of ocean investment?
Well, thanks. And one of the things that the Global Compact did is work with over 300 stakeholders to create sustainable ocean principles, which can be used by businesses to demonstrate their stewardship with regards to the ocean. But it can also be used by the finance sector for diligence in various industries to ensure that that companies are demonstrating their stewardship. And one of the areas of focus for the Sustainable Ocean Principles is it emphasizes data and transparency. So it calls upon businesses to share relevant data and support research and mapping of the ocean. And also it calls upon signatories of the Sustainable Ocean Principles to be transparent around their ocean-related activities. But all of this can't be done without, with collaboration, as you say, and cooperation. But right now, there's a lot of data out there, and but there's so much data that businesses are also realizing that if they don't start taking more data-driven approaches to their business, their operations, and their future, they're really going to lose out. And part of reaping the benefits of this data is reaping the benefit of a shared ocean understanding, and that involves sharing collaboratively data. So businesses and industries, quite motivated, I would say, to share. And if you take the offshore wind industry, for example, share quite a bit of data, but it needs to be better managed and harmonized so that we can get more out of it and more understanding. But there are a number of collaborations, and we're seeing increasing collaborations around data and ways to contribute. For example, I mentioned the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution and its ocean database to unleash data from the private sector to help our understanding of the ocean. I wanted to bring up, though, a collaboration that we're starting with the Lloyd's Register Foundation, the UN Global Compact, and Accenture. We're currently in a user phase trying to determine if we had more transparency of what happens at sea, and we're better able to understand ocean health and ocean safety of people working on and around sea, and how we can combine the two, a better understanding of safety for people working in and around sea in light of a changing ocean, how that would help drive decisions. And actually, I would really look forward to speaking with any members of in our room today as they have thoughts about how an ocean safety index can be developed. We imagine that this type of index and database, which would be open source and for the benefit of society, could lay on top of some of the significant ocean databases out there, and whether that be what the EU is doing in terms of a virtual ocean, whether that's on top of Google, whether it's on top of IOC, UNESCO databases. But how can we shed a light on the harm that happens in the ocean to people and to the ocean, and through data better understand that? We think that can help inform, too, investment decisions by insurers, reinsurers, banks, financial institutions, but as well as businesses, in helping to make safer decisions, both now for our workforce now and our future ocean workforce. But I bring it up, one, looking forward to collaborating with you all if you do have ideas, but secondly, two, to say this is just an example of initiatives that are arising where, in the spirit of collaboration, we can shine more light on the ocean and help to advance its goals.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Suzanne. I mean, you highlighted lots of opportunities for collaboration. I mean, through the Sustainable Ocean Principles, but also through the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution that you mentioned, the Ocean Safety Index you're working on. Lots of great opportunities to work together. I'd also like to ask Dag as well. I mean, in terms of the collaborations you see and what works for you in terms of data sharing. I mean, DNB is also involved in many of those kind of fruitful collaborations. I mean, you are, for example, a founding member of the Poseidon Principles that collect data on climate impacts of shipping, for example. So in your experience, how can the power of collaboration be harnessed for better data-driven ocean investment?
There are different approaches, like the Poseidon Principles, like you mentioned. That was a banking initiative, telling the clients that this data need to be reported, and then the banks can report how their portfolios develop on that parameter. So that's one approach. Another approach is, I think a good example is Barents Watch, which is a Norwegian website run by the Norwegian government in salmon farming. Salmon farmers have to report a lot of data. So what this does is simply it makes it available in a very easy format. I think another approach is to standardize things. Like, Grant mentioned that, we don't really measure the temperature at 5 meters. You can get it, or we measure it, but you can't get it forecast, etc. When we measure things, it's also important that it's measured in a standardized way. So there's also, I think, an initiative which is interesting, which is a sort of private government collaboration and trying to standardize how different, data should be defined so they are directly comparable.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Dag, for highlighting those kind of initiatives, on the data from salmon farms, the Poseidon principles, but also the private government collaborations on defining better data sets. Grant, of course, you work a lot on collaborations. You work closely with salmon aquaculture companies, with impact investors. You also have collaboration with researchers. How do you see the role of collaboration in harnessing data-driven ocean investment?
So we're managing, in some cases, 100 data streams that's coming fast and furious off of farms, and that can be used to tackle a wide range of problems. And so oftentimes when we're sitting down with salmon farms to walk through the data licenses associated with these, it's the first time that they've had the opportunity to sit down and think systematically, which of these data streams solves our problems and which of these data streams solves the region or the world's problems. And so there's different data licenses associated with all of the streams that are coming off of the sites. And of course, there's going to be, some data streams that represent the secret sauce of that individual company, but then there's a lot of opportunity. So we say inside our company that for example, our flagship region early on has been British Columbia. British Columbia has systematically seen some of the most binding changes from climate change in terms of its ocean conditions as relates to salmon. And so it's not a coincidence that those groups are the first ones to go look for innovative new solutions in terms of their data. And it's also not a coincidence that some of those groups are right now working hard on, with members of the community, oceanographers, and others to take their data and leverage it to solve collective problems across the region. So we'll have something to announce along those lines before too long, but we're really excited about the opportunity to work with salmon farms to solve those regional problems and really describe climate change in real time.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Grant. You highlighted, the opportunities in British Columbia with, all these innovative new solutions for collaboration between different stakeholders, which is really great to see. For the final bit of our conversation, I'd like to turn to kind of the tagline of the World Ocean Summit itself, which is all about, the 2030 goals. Where are the biggest opportunities kind of for data-driven investment to meet these ambitious targets? Of all the SDGs, and, Suzanne mentioned that SDG 14 has attracted the lowest levels of investment, which is really a missed opportunity, as we mentioned, in terms of, looking at the ocean's importance in areas such as climate action. And we mentioned the enormous potential of data-driven ocean investment to contribute to kind of, sustainable development goals, food security, sustainable consumption, restoring life below water, as well as, reducing pressure on land, of course, and other opportunities. So let's talk about kind of your projections for data-driven investment in this decade of action, how it can contribute to the 2030 targets. And I'd like to start with Suzanne. What are your kind of projections for this decade? How can data-driven ocean investment evolve in a way that it can help to meet its potential to support the 2030 targets?
Thanks. Well, in terms of the SDGs, and you talked about data supporting, let's not SDG 17, which talks about partnerships and collaboration. And I think that's an essential one to highlight, because in this age of data, as we are now moving into the decade of action and underpinning and making our SDGs smarter, we need data, we need cooperation, and perhaps SDG 17 might be the most important in achieving our goals through data. If I had maybe 3 calls to action to help support this collaboration, touching a little bit on what I might have said earlier, which is we should really try to democratize our data. We should try to shine the light on areas where we have these data gaps. So thinking Global South, thinking of the deep sea, the Arctic, and making it open source. Secondly, we should support an ocean digital twin. If you think about a metaverse for the ocean, because that's going to enable us to model and make financial scenario analysis on a changing ocean and the interaction with humans in the ocean and a better understanding, which will also help us to support the targets for the SDGs. And then also, really, we should leverage the power and think about how we can leverage the power of the financial industry, because it has the ability to create pivotal change in the ocean and time industries, and help to close the data gaps and identify the opportunities for the new blue workforce through what it finances. So it actually very much can influence the direction of our actions and our businesses and our industry in the ocean. And for this, the finance sector does need the right data and global data to demonstrate impact of its investments. So yes, the democratization of data, supporting the digital twin, and let's empower the financial industry to use data to support the ocean in the right way.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Suzanne. I mean, highlighting, those 3 key factors, and, the role of data in helping to drive those, democratization, ocean digital twin, and the financial industry. I'd also like to ask the same question as well to Dag, in terms of, how do you see this decade evolve in terms of, what is your view on the trajectory for ocean data in this decade of action, and how can data really help to meet our ambitious sustainable development agenda?
I think data will be tremendously powerful. It takes a little while before things really get traction. So I wouldn't be too firm on a specific time frame. But then when it finally does get traction, it can be, crazy powerful. I think. Maybe especially the combination of, cheap sensors, big data, and artificial intelligence can be very powerful, especially in biological industries where everything depends on everything, so they can be very difficult to understand. In aquaculture, that can be understanding the fish better, understanding the environment better, and then understanding the interaction between the two better, which hopefully should be able to, make us able to produce more fish with a lower environmental footprint. In fishing, it can be important in order to understand also the interaction between the fish and the environment, and also the interaction between different fish stocks when you try to assess, the harvestable biomass. I think standardization is very important, so you can take data set from different suppliers and you can put them into one algorithm. And then I think also data is very important in regulations. One example of sort of a data-driven regulation is the traffic light system regulating the capacity in the Norwegian salmon industry. Of course, there is a potential to do that in a way, better way with more data and better algorithms, etc. And it's a potential to use it in a lot of other ocean industries also. And I think when it comes to financing things, our starting point is that if you have a good project, it will get financed. Of course, there are exceptions, but I think for a project to be good, it's not enough that one project is good. It needs to be within a good framework, meaning that the entire sector is well understood and well regulated. And I think that in many ways is often equally important.
Yeah, that makes sense, Doug. You highlighted the need for standardization, the role of regulation. You mentioned the example of the traffic light system for salmon, where data is, of course, crucial, and of course the link with the financing and having a good framework for the entire sector. I'd also like to ask Grant, in terms of what you see for this decade of action. I mean, what are your predictions for this decade, and how can ocean data play an important role in supporting the sustainable development agenda?
So I think we already touched on the question about, will ocean financing look more like terrestrial agriculture financing? Other good examples of places where large unknown risks that were previously unmodeled, where data tools provided a bridge towards new models of financing, those might include natural catastrophe risk and property insurance and reinsurance markets, as well as agriculture, but also renewable energy financing. One of the things that you see across all those different examples is that comprehensive modeling, and it's really important to be approximately right everywhere rather than precisely incorrect somewhere. So comprehensive modeling is really important, and it has to be modeling focused on the cash flows of the underlying business in a way that runs right alongside all the causal variables that are driving those cash flows. So whether that's environmental footprint or risks themselves. So what we've done at Scoot Science is built a model that runs across 3,700 individual salmon sites across the globe, and it's running day by day, simulating the historic experience of cash flows at those individual salmon farms everywhere in the world, driven by ocean conditions. And obviously that's a great opportunity to ask questions about sustainability as well. So couple highlights from that, you can see 31 times the risk return and impact adjusted results from salmon as you would have from U.S. agriculture and livestock over the last 10 plus years. That's one. Another, that you take away is you can see individual sites. Some individual sites perform really well in terms of their sustainability, and others do not. But the industry as a whole is unique in terms of offering these exceptional returns in a way where sustainability is fundamentally aligned with profitability. That bringing a fish to market, because feed represents so much of the impact at these sites, bringing a fish to market is one of the best ways that you can make sure that you're operating in the most sustainable manner possible. And so for that reason, sustainability oriented investors who are pushing their groups to be more profitable are often systematically pushing them to be more sustainable on a per dollar basis.
That's amazing. Thanks a lot, Grant. I mean, you highlighted, the opportunity here. I mean, bringing other models of financing into the ocean space. You mentioned property risk, renewable energy financing, but also you mentioned the opportunity really to harness this data to highlight, the impact adjusted results. I mean, you highlighted, having all that data can, bring to the fore the exceptional returns, not only for sustainability but also for profitability. So that's fantastic. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I'd really like to thank the panelists for their amazing insights, Suzanne, Dag, and Grant. And also like to just briefly summarize. I mean, we heard about the importance, for building the transparency, to build, this pool of kind of trusted data for better ocean investments. I mean, to have clear standards. I mean, it's just, several of the panelists mentions the need to have this kind of standardization, metrics that against which investments can really be measured accurately, having regulation and a good framework around that. The need to demonstrate impact and performance, as Grant just mentioned, having this kind of impact adjusted performance indicators is really crucial, and also combining the public, private, elements to this as well, and to working together. We talked about data sharing, data collaborations, working with investors to really using data as well to demonstrate impact. Suzanne, you mentioned the democratization of ocean and safety data. Dag, you mentioned the data platforms, so Salmon, for example, that are creating lots of opportunities. Grant, you mentioned the great opportunities for having this kind of aquaculture, ocean observing kind of network, and having other elements from other sectors such as property insurance, agriculture, and renewables, the kind of that we can learn from in this really exciting space. And of course, there's lots of further opportunities to collaborate, and that's why we had such kind of a great panel from different perspectives. So thanks a lot again for your great contributions, and please stay tuned for the next session of the 9th Annual World Ocean Summit.